The Muscular System, Chapter 6, Lecture 4. There are 5 very basic understandings about gross muscle activity. I call these the 5 golden rules of skeletal muscle activity because they make it easier to understand muscle movements and appreciate muscle interactions. And you can read those there. Without a few exceptions, all skeletal muscles cross at least one joint. Typically, the bulk of a skeletal muscle lies proximal to the joint crossed. All skeletal muscles have at least 2 attachments, the origin and the insertion. Skeletal muscles can only pull, they never push. And during contraction, a skeletal muscle insertion moves towards the origin. Every one of our 600 or so skeletal muscles is attached to bone or to other connective tissue structures at no fewer than 2 points. One of these points, the origin, is attached to the immovable or less movable bone. The insertion is attached to the movable bone, and when the muscle contracts, the insertion moves towards the origin. When a skeletal muscle contracts, its insertion moves towards its origin, and here's a diagram showing that. Flexion is a movement, generally in the sagittal plane, that decreases the angle of the joint and brings 2 bones closer together. Flexion is a typical of hinge joints. Extension is the opposite of flexion, so it is a movement that increases the angle or the distance between 2 bones or parts of the bone, like straightening out the knee or the elbow. Extension that is greater than 180 degrees, as when you tip your head so that your chin points towards the ceiling, is called hyperextension. Here you can see the flexion and extension of the shoulder and the knee. And in this one, we show the hyperextension of the head. Rotation is a movement of bone around its longitudinal axis. Rotation is a common movement of ball and socket joints and describes the movement of the atlas around the dens of the axis in the vertebrae, as in shaking your head, no. Here you can see different areas of rotation. Abduction is moving a limb away from the midline or medial plane of the body. And adduction is the opposite of abduction, so it is the movement of a limb towards the body midline. Here you can see the abduction, adduction, and circumduction movements. Circumduction is a combination of flexion, extension, abduction, and adduction, commonly seen in ball and socket joints such as the shoulder. The proximal end of the limb is stationary and its distal end moves in a circle. The limb as a whole outlines a cone. Up and down movements of the foot at the ankle are given special names. Lifting the foot so that its superior surface approaches the shin, standing on your heels, is called dorsiflexion, whereas depressing the foot or pointing the toes is called plantar flexion. Dorsiflexion of the foot corresponds to extension of the hand at the wrist, whereas plantar flexion of the foot corresponds to flexion of the hand. And here you can see them. Inversion and eversion are also special movements of the foot. To invert the foot, turn the sole medially. To evert the foot, turn the sole laterally. And here you can see it. The terms supination or pronation refer to movements of the radius around the ulna. Supination occurs when the forearm rotates laterally so that the palm faces anterior and the radius and the ulna are parallel. Pronation occurs when the forearm rotates medially so that the palm faces posteriorly. Pronation brings the radius around the ulna so that the 2 bones form an X. A helpful memory trick is if you lift a cup of soup up to your mouth, on your palm you are supinating or supinating. Ha! And here's what it looks like. The palm of the hand, the saddle joint between the metacarpal 1 and the carpals, allows opposition of the thumb. This is the action by which you move your thumb to touch the tips of the other fingers on the same hand. This unique action makes the hand, human hand, a fine tool for grasping and manipulating things. And here you can see a diagram of it. The muscle that has the major responsibility for causing a particular movement is called the prime mover. Muscles that oppose or reverse a movement are called antagonists. When a prime mover is active, its antagonist is stretched and relaxed. Synergists help prime movers by producing the same movement or by reducing undesirable movements. Fixators are special synergists. They hold a bone still or stabilize the origin of a prime mover so that the tension can be used to move the insertion bone. Some muscles are named different in reference to some imaginary line, usually the midline of the body of the long axis of a limb bone. When a muscle's name includes the term rectus, which is straight, its fibers run parallel to that imaginary line. For example, the rectus femoris is the straight muscle of the thigh or the femur. Similarly, the term oblique as part of a muscle's name tells you that the muscle fibers run obliquely or at a slant to an imaginary line. Some terms as maximus means largest, and minimus means smallest, and longus means long, are sometimes used in the names of muscles. For example, the gluteus maximus is the largest muscle of the gluteus muscle group. Some muscles are named for the bone for which they are associated. For example, the temporalis and the frontalis muscles overlie the temporal and frontal bones of the skull, respectively. When the term biceps, triceps, and quadriceps forms part of a muscle name, you can assume that the muscle has 2, 3, or 4 origins, respectively. For example, the bicep muscle of an arm has 2 heads, or origin, and the tricep muscle has 3. Occasionally, muscles are named for their attachment sites. For example, the sternocleidomastoid muscle has its origin on the sternum, which is sterno, and clavicle, which is cleido, and inserts on the mastoid process of the temporal bone. Some muscles have a distinctive shape that helps them to identify them. For example, the deltoid muscle is roughly triangular, so deltoid, of course, means triangular. When muscles are named for their actions, such as flexor or extensor or abductor, they appear in their names. So what do we get from the key points from this lecture? Well, what action is being performed by a person who sticks out his thumb to hitch a ride? What actions take place at the neck when you nod your head up and down as if saying yes? In what way are fixators and synergist muscles important? And based on their names, deduce some characteristics of the following muscles: tibialis anterior, erector spinae, rectus abdominis. Well, this ends our lectures for the muscle system. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll move on to the next chapter.